שנקרא התחלנו. Hi.
Welcome to tzuzamen.
Hi, Tzili.
A new episode. Hi, Tzipi.
How are you?
I'm okay.
And just before we talk to you, that will Dan Tadmor,
Yes.
before we tell who you are, we just want to make sure that people understand that we are not competing with the news. We are not a news program. And we only invite people mainly that can inspire us because they would like to grow, right? So today we invited you. Tzili, can you please introduce?
Sure, Dan Tadmor, the CEO of ANU, the Jewish Museum. ANU is basically the new name for Bet Atfutzot, as everybody knows, and ANU means us. Tzuzamen is together, and ANU it's us. It's us together. Yeah, all of us, the Jewish world, together with Dan. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Shalom. Good evening for me. Good afternoon for you. Can I just say one thing that's related to what's happening? Because it's something I'm very proud of.
Right.
So today we reopened the museum. So we're recording this on what is today? Tuesday?
Yeah.
And today we reopened the museum while there's still attacks going on. And we're the only museum in the center of Israel that opened today.
Wow.
And opened as a matter of principle because museums are there to serve the people and we should be open.
Exactly, because the whole world is still under Corona, so they think you open because of the Corona. We're taking
So we
of all the in the Middle East.
And
so
the
that's
Gaza
what
Strip and the
Dan relates to.
and the demonstrations between Jews and Arabs in Israel. That's
everything
an
is shut down. Yeah.
Incredible.
And the rocket attacks. Yeah. So but the point is this, that we opened and people came. It wasn't a regular day, but we had something like 200 visitors today. So the museum was full of people. And I was really surprised. I said, we're going to open as a matter of principle, even if nobody comes. But then they came. So it was a really wonderful day, and I'm very proud of the fact that we actually managed to open.
Well, there is also a subtext to it. I mean, on his face, it means that we keep living, and we have to, survival is so important. But I think there is a subtext to it that you opened the Jewish Museum now.
I couldn't agree more, and it has to do with the narrative that we tell at the Museum of the Jewish People, which is bigger than the narrative of survival. So if we backtrack a little bit about what the museum is and what it is that we do. So on March 7th, we opened the biggest Jewish museum in the world, which is the Museum of the Jewish People. How big? About 72,000 square feet. That's a big museum.
Yeah.
7,000 square meters. This was the culmination of over 10 years of planning and execution, most of which Tzili was participating in as a friend and a partner and a supporter. It's a big story, the story of the Jewish people. And so it took us a long time to decide what we wanted to do. And then it took some time to raise the funds, and then it even took some time to actually execute. And you need to visit the museum in order to really. A museum is an immersive experience. I can talk about it until tomorrow, but it's not a replacement for the actual visit. But what I did want to say in relation to what you said, Tzipi, is that the narrative of the museum intertwines the narrative of the Jewish people, which is, on the one hand, it's a narrative of victimhood and survival, but it's also a narrative of thriving and flourishing and influencing and being influenced. So all of that is intertwined. But certainly survival is part of it, but it's not the story in its entirety. It's not just surviving.
Yeah, but also what's really, this is maybe too soon in our conversation, but somehow, some people like me, I'm sure Tzili also, maybe you too, in a way complain that we don't know much and we don't talk about Jewish life pre the Holocaust. We almost start from the Holocaust. Also in school, we have to, in my case, my mother is from Poland, my father is from Berlin. They came in the war.
I don't know that we don't know, but people use the Holocaust as almost the birth of everything.
Right.
And the old
And the
Bet
justification to everything.
that's another story. But the old Bet Futzot many, many years ago was basically only old communities and old models of communities from many, 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 many years ago. And it was so backwards that it eventually died out. Right, Dan?
Right. So the old museum opened in 1978, and it was a wonderful museum.
Yes, I was
Yeah,
there.
we remember.
Its founding fathers, Abba Kovner, Scheike Weinberg, Karl Katz, and a host of other people that banded together to create this wonderful museum, really created a landmark. And for a few years, it was just a wonderful museum. It was groundbreaking in terms of its conception. It was groundbreaking in terms of its curatorial concept. There were thematic gates, the gate of community, the gate of this, the gate of that. So it told the Jewish story in a very, what was then groundbreaking way. Even technology for that time, the fact that there were what is it, audio-visual aids in a museum. That was then blasphemy, that you go into a museum and you actually hear things and there's screens, and that was all groundbreaking. And it was very good for many years. I mean, it was a good decade. Even 20 years after it opened, it was still a fairly good museum, but museums age. People age, museums age, and the museum we just opened is destined to age. A museum is just a way to tell a story. It's a means of telling a story. It's nothing more. It's not holy in itself. And so it became apparent a long time ago that we needed change. Now, the museum that was opened in 78 did not at all tell the story of modern Jewish history. It stopped with, I would say, even the modern era really didn't have a place in it. It stopped in the 17th or 18th century, okay, for the most part. So it told the story of Babylon and Alexandria, not so much Babylon, but Alexandria, Spain, the Golden Age in Spain, certainly medieval times, and Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews until, I would say, the early modern era, okay? It didn't cover the modern era at all. That's one thing. The other thing is that it adopted what the late, great Jewish historian Salo Baron once referred to as the lachrymose conception of Jewish history. You know, I looked up the word lachrymose. It's spelled R-Y-M-O-S-E. It means tearful, tears.
Oh.
So I learned a new word when I read Salo Baron, but his thesis was, and he said this already back in the 30s, but he kept saying it after the Holocaust as well. He said the conception of Jewish history done by Jewish historians like Gretz and others was, all of it was suffering. It's a history of suffering. And Salo Baron came forward and said, no, that's not true. Yes, we have been persecuted, but most of the time, or some of the time, we thrived and flourished and prospered. And but the museum that was opened in 78 very much adopted this lachrymose conception. And what we've tried to do this time around is that intertwined story that neither narrative is true. A complete narrative of persecution is not true. Certainly a complete narrative saying that we've just flourished and life was great is not true, even in times when it is thought that it was perfect. So for instance, we all grew up learning about the Golden Age in Spain, right? So the Golden Age in Spain in the Middle Ages under Muslim rule, right? That's when Jews prospered in Spain in terms of being prominent in the community, succeeding financially, Maimonides, science, medicine, poetry, the great poetry of the Golden Age. Think of, I mean, this is incredible, right? And we were taught that it was a perfect era for Jews. Well, it wasn't. There were pogroms under Muslim rule, and there was persecution, not all the time, right? But from time to time. And the same thing, of course, is true for Ashkenazi Jews as well. Yes, there was persecution, but it wasn't only persecution. There were times of flourishing. There was a great industry of study, right? The whole world of yeshivot, and the whole, and on the other hand, the Haskalah, the Enlightenment, all of that happened as we, from time to time, absolutely were persecuted. And yes, the Holocaust is the worst atrocity ever committed in the history of mankind. There's no denying that whatsoever. But as you said before I started my speech, not the totality of the Jewish story.
Yeah. You know that it's interesting because our generation that saw the old, years ago in the 70s, over the years, and I remember when I met you, and I knew that I'm coming to see the new CEO of Berat Futsot. I was so surprised to see you, a young guy, and I said, a young guy in such an old museum, because the whole thing, the whole concept was like a fading old times, old age museum. And all of a sudden, something fresh. And I have to say that what I like the most is that you keep it fresh all the time. And the nice thing about the museum is it really welcome every age from everywhere in a interesting and up-to-date way, with the combination of remember what took place, but not all bad, and we have still places to go. So
yeah, but you see, but can you please take us like bullet points? So what did you add? Like if you just as a bullet point, like you just told us, the golden age. So what open it up to?
So we didn't add anything. It's a brand new museum. It's not a renovation.
Yeah, but you still had the old, no, in terms of concept.
No, it's a whole new concept.
It's a whole new museum. We took the building, we basically took out everything that was within it, except for very few things that we retained from the old museum, like the dioramas. Tzili, I can't wait for you to see the dioramas because they look wonderful now. They've all been rejuvenated and they look wonderful. There were 11 dioramas. For those who don't know, they're a very old museum technique whereby scenes are reenacted in a three-dimensional, right, with depth, snapshot, okay? And museums don't do them anymore. We had 11 dioramas that are wonderful, and we renovated all of them, cleaned them up, rejuvenated them. They look wonderful. But aside from that, it's a brand new museum, and it spans 3 floors and 4 wings. One wing is dedicated to Jewish identity and culture in the modern era, or in our time. So in terms of time, it begins with the 20th century, and the subject matter is Jewish identity and culture, personal identity, family identity, denominations, folklore, Jews in the arts, in theater, in dance, in music, in cinema, television, literature, and art. And when I say wing, this is 20,000 square feet. It's big. It's a museum in itself. Every wing is a museum in itself. So that's it's the 3rd floor, but it's the 1st wing. And then the 2nd floor is dedicated to Jewish history, and it's chronological. Technically it begins with Abraham, but actually it begins with the destruction of the first temple. 586 BC, it's the first time that the Jewish people are exiled from their land. And from that time till today, the Jewish history, there's one phenomenon that always survives, and that is that there's more than one center for Jewish people. So in the age of antiquity, it's land of Israel, Babylonia, and Alexandria. And then in the Middle Ages, Sfarad and Ashkenaz. In the early modern era, it's Poland, Lithuania, and the Ottoman Empire. And then in the modern era, it's Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Islamic countries, and then the Great Migration to America at the end of the 19th and 20th centuries. And today, the 2 great Jewish communities are Israel and North America, with another plus minus 2 million Jews spread out throughout the world. But that's the phenomenon of there always having been more than one center. So that's another wing, Jewish history, another 20,000 square feet. And then there's a wing dedicated to the foundations of Jewish living, Shabbat, Bible, the covenant, Jewish life cycle, the Jewish yearly cycle, and a huge gallery, Hallelujah. It's called Hallelujah, and it's dedicated to synagogues and the way Jews congregate. And it has our collection of synagogue models. So that's the other thing that survived from the old museum, an exquisite collection of synagogue models. But in this iteration, we added more synagogues because the old synagogues, bar one, except for one, they're all Orthodox synagogues because they're classic synagogues. So whether it's 2nd century Turkey or 13th century Prague, the Altneuschule in Prague, it's an Orthodox synagogue because it preceded Jewish denominations. Denominations are a relatively modern phenomenon in Judaism. So through media and interactive, we added more synagogues, reform, conservative, just Jews hanging out in the park or doing Kabbalat Shabbat on the beach or whatever. So 4 wings, spanning so much space, you can't do it all in one go. And so that's the organizing principle in terms of the geography of the museum. In terms of so as I said, it's Jewish life. It's not only the bad part, it's everything.
Dan, what brought you to run this place? I mean, this is very unusual of a younger guy, secular, to take upon himself a lead of the umbrella of the Jewish world, not in an Orthodox way.
Yeah, but he came from, let's just go over, he came from journalism. He was an editor in the main newspaper in Israel, right? In Yediot Ahronoth.
Yeah, so I grew up in print, eventually becoming the CEO and editor-in-chief of the magazine division for Yediot Ahronoth, which is Israel's biggest publisher. And then I moved to television, and very briefly I ran the equivalent of Israeli MTV. And then I ran Telad, which is a television company producing channels for satellite and cable.
With Uzi Peled?
Hmm?
With Uzi Peled.
So yeah, Uzi Peled was still a shareholder when I was CEO of Telad.
Yeah.
And he's a very smart man.
Very smart man, and really changed the face of the culture in television.
Absolutely. He had a lot of foresight. He established a production company and a studio in the early 70s because 5 years before that, Israeli television began with one channel, and he said, oh, it's just a matter of time before there'll be more channels. So he was about 20 years ahead of his time before Channel 2.
Because what he established, we don't have it so much now, but we'll talk about it later. Therefore, I mentioned.
I completely agree.
Right.
Even when there were 3 franchises on Israeli TV, Keshet, Reshet, and Telad, Telad was always the different one.
Right.
It was the Jerusalem station. It was much more grounded. It was much more, it had more depth. And that's the legacy of Uzi Peled. It was him, okay? So same Telad, although when I ran it, it was no longer Channel 2. It was history, bio, all these American brands, MGM, which we converted to Hebrew television, and then the platform is satellite and hot cable.
So then after Telad,
and then I came to the museum. So, but what I'm saying is that I grew up in media.
I know he's young.
Yeah.
I'm not young at all. I mean, you keep flattering me, but I'm 57. That's not so young.
That's young. And when you started, you were younger. But
look,
take it.
If my eldest son wasn't such an idiot, I'd already be a grandfather.
Okay.
That's another show to do all this, to complain about kids and grandkids and the whole thing.
Listen, he's 30. He's been married for almost 2 years. I said, me by myself, just me, I will take 40% of the kid. So 2 afternoons a week is on me. 2 afternoons are on me, just me, not even me and my wife, just me. I took took care of 40% of your problem, just me personally, and he still hasn't produced.
Well, it's probably not enough for him.
You have to tell him form. So
Not
what
enough.
made you go to become CEO of the Jewish Museum?
Of the
So-
Jewish people.
Jewish people.
So look, a museum is a form of media. It's not really different than doing journalism or doing television. It's taking subject matter. Now, you know, because you direct and you create films, right?
Yes.
So what's the trick? The trick is to take subject matter, form it, and hand it over to the viewer.
Form
and
it
if-
in what way?
Well, in choosing a narrative, in knowing how to tell a story, in knowing how to craft, you know, an engaging sequence, it's basically the same. Okay, so here's my opinion. The entire trick is to know how to put yourself in the eyes of the viewer or the visitor. That is it. If you're able to do that trick and assume the position of the viewer or the visitor, you're going to be a good content producer. Okay? Then there are techniques as well.
But still, this museum, well, the job that you took upon yourself to change the whole perception of this museum and really present a huge community that is very diverse and has sub-communities, and still keep it united, open-head, progressive, friendly, and inviting. This is a mission that not everybody would take it upon themselves. You did it. Why?
So, like everything good in life, it happened by chance. So what happened was that I was CEO of Telad, but Jewish identity had always been important for me. I grew up in a secular family, but a very Jewish family. My Jewish identity was always a large part of who I was. I got that from both my parents, both my atheist dad and my agnostic mother, right? Who came
Not
from.
an Israeli identity?
Hmm?
They didn't put in you the Israeli identity, they put in you the Jewish identity?
So you're opening a side conversation that I don't think we have enough time to get into. But in my opinion, there is no Israeli identity that is disconnected from Jewish identity.
Oh,
Israel is where it is for a reason. The language that we speak was not invented in 1948. Our culture is so deep that it wasn't created instantly with the establishment of the state of Israel. We are Jews. I really, on the divide of what are we, Israelis or Jews, I know where I stand. I'm a Jew, okay? And
We spoke about it with Irina. Irina is the chairman of the board of the museum. And we asked each other, and Tzipi said she's in Israeli first, and I said I'm Jewish first. And I know that I'm in minority because the Israelis feel Israelis first. They're angry with the Jews, not with Judaism, but I also don't see the definition between Jewish people and Judaism. And the whole beauty in the museum is that you can be Jewish in Israel and outside of Israel without being Orthodox and without talking about the Jews that everybody refer to, the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox Jews.
But Tzili, you know that we grew up in the same street, we went to the same primary school, few years difference, not too much. But anyway, we were not really exposed to what you're talking about when you talk about Jews. You see, as far as learning the Bible, it was so didactic and learned by heart. The spirit of the Bible was never infused in me. Synagogues were not really accessible. So what I'm trying to say is that when I came first to the museum, I felt, a different atmosphere than when I go to it doesn't sound good, but I just tell you how we grew up.
But I have to say, I'm thinking about the way we grew up in the same school in the same neighborhood. We both grew up on Kikar Dizengoff.
Square
The
Dizengoff.
Square Dizengoff. And this is like the really belly button of everything. It's like Times Square here. It's interesting because at home there was either a mix or something very clear. It's either the people came from another country and they brought a tradition they grew up with, or they mixed it with the others in Israel, or people went to the kibbutz and they wanted to work the land, or people, and everybody of course went to the army. We grew up in a regular school, which a public school that didn't have a focus on anything, because Judaism was usually around the holidays and basic stuff about the Bible or stuff like this. Not beyond that. I think that each one, and we all went to youth movements, different youth movements.
It's a different education.
And I think that each one developed, those who really made sure to develop their own identity without leaning towards what everybody says or to be like everybody else, that each one was a bit different. Each one was a bit different and had the freedom to choose their own idea about the identity in between is being Israeli and being Jewish.
But listen, we look today, and you can correct me, even just today, unfortunately, when there is kind of division between secular and Haredim, ultra-religious, we don't really know about their life. There are so many groups within the ultra-Haredi, we know nothing. There is one face. Nobody ever took us and exposed us in a constructive way to their way of life. Therefore, you know, we have to, I don't know if you in the museum are actually dealing with those areas of Judaism to open up some understanding to the different sections of Judaism.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with a lot of what you say. Just let's go back a little bit though to the Jewish identity versus Israeli. So when you grew up in Israel, you were more Jewish than you realized. Okay,
no doubt.
Your language was the Jewish language. Your weekly cycle and your yearly cycle was Jewish. You celebrated the holidays.
The reason to be in Israel was Jewish.
The reason to be in Israel. The only reason I exist.
Jewish.
Exactly, but when you start dissecting it, there's a lot of content there that you weren't even aware of that you were getting. Okay, you went to celebrate Lag BaOmer. That's a national holiday, but it's a national holiday that celebrates something that happened 2,000 years ago, right? Bar Kochva and all that stuff. These are national. It's a national holiday.
The holidays did it.
It's not a religious holiday, it's a national holiday in the sense that Hanukkah is more than it is a religious holiday, it's a national holiday. The Maccabees, fought the enemy and won, right?
There was a whole adaptation that would fit the atmosphere at the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, by default, you were a lot more Jewish than you realized, okay? And I grew up with that feeling. And so, to me, it's obvious that there is such a thing as a secular Jew. It's obvious to me because I'm a secular Jew. I mean, I don't need to study about it. I live it. Okay. But in the museum, there is a lot of, since we display the Jewish story in its entirety, the whole thing, there's a whole section dedicated to Jewish thought and learning. There are two separate interactives that are dedicated to the Talmud, which I know is near and dear to Tzili's heart because her late husband's breadth of knowledge in the Talmud, okay? And by the way, some would argue that, I don't know if I want to go there, but I didn't know Leon in the years that he was in his prime
years, yeah.
I know about him. This is a mind that was sharpened, right, by the upbringing that he had, which was okay. Which he went to a yeshiva. He went to a rabbinical.
His mind was very sharp, so it made everything, very rich and sharpened more with this. I don't know that everybody studies Talmud is sharp as it is, you know, but I wouldn't, it's like the chicken and the egg. It's like, let's leave it this way. But there's so many sides that I think that people are not even aware what they take in and what they adopt and what's them and what they use over time when it comes out, and you don't even report to yourself that I'm doing this because, or automatically you see variety of things that take place that we recognize from here and from there, and it's all out there, and this is part of the basic Judaism that we're talking about.
I just want to say, among the many books that I will not write, is a book about the depth of culture. We're not aware of the depth of culture and things that are completely subliminal.
Nobody really brought us into.
But you know what? Not everything has to be brought to us. We can bring it to it, and we can investigate.
When we were kids, people had to open the door for us. And I think that your museum is going to do it now. It's going to open the door to a lot of different parts of Israel. I just want in a parenthesis to go back a minute. When you change your previous occupations to now, it's almost like changing in a way personality, but it was different when you were in the media, because today the media is not dealing with open up doors to understanding, to information, you know. Every part of the media is an agenda, political agenda.
I think that's an important insight.
You know, it's changed, it changed not only in Israel, also here. You have this channel is for folks for Trump, and this one is the Labour Party. So journalism, we have to call it differently. So what you do has the elements of pure journalists who go, learn, study
the way
what
it used to be.
Yeah, learn and study and investigate something and then come and for your sake, the best way to present it.
The way to present it that everybody can take it without feeling threatened, or that it's forbidden, or it's open and it's okay for everybody, up to a point that if you want to take it further, you dig in.
So in many ways, you actually defined your role, as we say in museum role, what we also miss so much in journalism today. It's gone.
Yeah, that's a very important observation. I will say something to kind of counter it, but then I'll agree in the end. So my counter argument is that if you would have asked me before I started this project, if there is such a thing as just the absolute truth, I would have probably said yes, but there really isn't. There are narratives. Everything is a narrative. And even when, in the museum, I can tell you that we give voice to narratives. You can't create content and not willingly have a narrative. But what you can do, and that's the difference, is that you can try to maintain intellectual honesty, okay? And present more than one narrative. I'll give you an example in a second, but present, if you encounter more than one narrative, give them both and let the visitor decide, okay? And I'll give you an example. The Jews of Islamic countries, there are three competing narratives as to the story of the Jews in Islamic countries, okay? Which are, two of which are true to an extent. So one narrative is that Zionism existed in Islamic countries, and Jews who came from Islamic countries came for ideological and religious reasons. They made aliyah, okay? And then at the other extreme is a narrative that says, ma pitom, they were persecuted and they were exiled from Islamic countries, and actually they became refugees. People were actually expelled from Islamic countries. That's the other pure narrative. And of course, the truth is somewhere in between, right? Jews from some Islamic countries, in some instances, were definitely expelled. From other Islamic countries, it wasn't an expulsion, but these countries were not welcoming to them. And so Jews had to get out, right? And it is also true that there was lively Zionism in Islamic countries as well. So it's not one narrative or the other. Like everything else, it's a mix between the two. So what we did in the museum is that we present all the different narratives, which are true to an extent.
But you know, when you do documentary, as far as I'm concerned, okay, if you don't show the complexity, the multi-layers, if you come like you came with an intent, you can call it narrative, but it's actually, it's intent. Why you're doing this section in the museum? Why you're doing this? What are you asking? What is the question, right? Otherwise, it's one-sided, and you have preconceived ideas, and you confuse. So when we are talking about if there is truth or not truth, the question is really what questions you are asking.
It's basically a presentation, and you can find your truth in the presentation. And then it's you cannot argue with this, and you cannot blame anybody. But then looking back at the beginning of the road, when you took it upon yourself, that's what you saw in your mind, or it developed over the years? Because you are leading, it's like a movement, you know, it's a big leader of a movement to accept Judaism in a certain way, not by the rules, and still being accepted by almost everybody, because I'm sure you'll have some enemies over the time that it's open.
Make it more interesting.
Yeah.
So first of all, I have to say that I joined something that was already in motion. So when I joined the museum 8.5 years ago, there were plans in place. Irina, our fearless leader and chair of the board, was already the chair, and things were already in motion. I can't take the credit for setting things in motion. It's simply not true. I mean, it's a nice narrative, but it isn't true. Going back to our previous topic.
It's more difficult to join a journey, you know, and keep integration of it.
And lead it towards where it needs to be led.
So don't underestimate your
That's
role.
right.
Now, the interesting thing is that reality has changed during the almost decade that I've been there. The atmosphere in Israel regarding these topics is today different than it was when I joined in 2012.
Right.
Israel is a conservative-leaning country right now, both in terms of its population and in terms of its government. Now, conservative is not a bad word. It's a descriptive fact. Israel is currently, it's currently a leaning in something. By the way, in some things, Israel is very liberal. Okay, but in a lot of things, Israel is leaning conservative, and that's fine. Okay, but what it means is that things that you planned 10 years ago are now accepted a bit differently.
That's exactly what we were talking before. Before we started to talk with you, we just mentioned that about some organizations in Israel and some movements and how they're slipping a little bit on the road, and they don't notice that the road changed a bit, and they have to make sure to force it to be upgraded and non-stop to make sure it will get right.
So in this climate, by the way, you know, I just want to make sure that we use our time right. In this climate, what you just said, what's happening with the young people, the American young people, is taking into consideration that we are becoming more conservative, or how the changes in Israel, how much you are worried about containing the young Jewish youth, let's say up to age 40 youth.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Your son is a kid.
Yeah, it is.
What do you do? What are you worried?
First of all, Tzili, you mentioned that it's easy to slip on the road. It's also easy to lose your principles.
Right.
Very easy to lose your principles.
Oh, absolutely.
So you open a new museum, and the museum is pluralistic, which means that we show all different denominations. It means that when you see, there's a project there of Jewish families, and there's an LGBT family. And we know that currently in the current climate in Israel, some people coming into the museum will be offended by things that they see. And it's a decision, it's a conscious decision, that if someone approaches us and says, listen, I feel that I'm not represented, you forgot me. That's a legitimate claim, if it happens to be true, but it's a legitimate conversation. But if somebody comes up and says, look, I'm represented, that's fine, but why are you representing this guy? I don't want to be next to him. That's something that there's nothing I can do about it. I can be sorry about it. Right? I can regret it. I can hope for better days of more acceptance, but I will not.
But you still present it. But you still present it.
Absolutely. That's the.
As a viewer, you don't have to take it and accept it, but it's there.
Right. Right.
And that's the very important point.
And if somebody has a problem with it, I can lament the fact that he has a problem with it, but I'm not going to change the museum. Okay. And that's an example of something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought we'd have such a big problem 10 years ago. You know, the public opinion has shifted.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you need to maintain, again, your intellectual honesty and your principles. You don't need to be stupid about it, okay? I'll give you an example of not being stupid about it. So on the level, on the wing that has to do with the foundations, the Bible, there's a whole section dedicated to the Bible's influence on world culture, in art, in literature, in a lot of different ways. Now, in the section that has to do with art, I asked for there not to be nudity. Certainly you can find great works of art that depict nudity in the Garden of Eden. But to me, that's being insensitive.
Right.
And I think that I'm giving up any principle in not necessarily putting nudity in a place that I know would prevent some people from enjoying that part of
private gallery, it's okay because you can choose whether to come or not. But once it's open for everybody, you have to cover a very, very wide range, which I think there's room for few considerations, you know, just to be fair to everybody, knowing that you're doing it for that purpose and it's okay and there's nothing bad about it.
So can the museum, in what way the museum is putting effort to bring young people not to assimilate?
Yeah, our core belief is that the way to strengthen Jewish identity is by engaging in Jewish identity. Our core belief is that the more you know about who you are, the stronger your connection will be to your Jewish identity. In fact, that is the single thing, that's the mission, that is it, okay? Strengthening our sense of belonging through engagement in Jewish identity. And we bring in young people through a collaboration with the Ministry of Education. We actually fund busing from the periphery, because you know that in Israel, one of the big problems is how do you get kids from the periphery to visit a museum in the heart of Tel Aviv? And the problem is not admission. We let them in free. Okay, that's not the problem. The problem is the bus costs 2,000 shekels, which is the equivalent of, $800, okay? Yeah. And so we actually created a fund to sponsor transportation for kids from the periphery to come into the museum. Now, the other thing is this. We very much put an emphasis on representation. Denomination, gender, right? Men and women and everything in between, and also ethnicity. So when a kid comes in from the periphery and say they come from a Mizrahi or Sephardi background, we need to make sure that they see themselves.
Yes.
Wherever there is representation.
Right.
Wonderful.
They can recognize, yeah. Dan, what is your take about the evangelists?
Because what we know about them, that they want us eventually, in the long run, to abandon our Jewishness. If not, they will kill us. That's the narrative we hear.
I know the theory, okay, the theological theory, but you know, I've met evangelicals. They honestly and genuinely love the Jewish people and love Israel. Okay, it's honest. It's from the heart.
Don't they know what I say? They don't know what the narrative that I know.
I think that being human beings, like all of us, we live sometimes in two separate worlds. So we know what theology says about the end of days. Okay, but in everyday life, you love and you hug and you want to get close to. And I think it's genuine. I think it's a mistake to only look at the theology. I think that your average evangelical that comes to Israel has a true love for Israel and for the Jewish people. I feel it. It's true. And I don't think that the average evangelical really has the presence of mind of whatever the end of days theology is. Like most of us, we don't really, we learn how to reconcile, differences within ourselves, all of us, right? And you live your daily life according to your emotions and not according to necessarily to what you rationally, deduce. So that's my take on it. And I think it's very important for Christians in general, evangelicals specifically, to come to the museum to learn about the Jewish people. I've had great experiences so there's a growing Hispanic evangelical community. Oh. So time-wise, when Hispanics are naturally thought of as Catholics, not evangelicals or Protestants, right? So, but there's a growing Hispanic evangelical community in America. And to teach these people about the golden age in Spain, about Ladino, about the fact that my wife's grandmother used to speak a language that was a hybrid of Hebrew and Spanish, right? To them, it's all new. And I think it fosters more love and more understanding. And so I don't take the cynical view of our relationship with evangelicals. I think there's I think it's genuine. I honestly do.
I think that ignorance is a big problem from every point of view and every side. We don't know enough about them. They don't know enough about us. What always surprises to me, and I'm talking about the simple people in most remote villages or towns in the United States that have no money to live, and they still share to give to the Jews in Israel. I don't know what they know. I don't know what they care. I don't know what they're being told. And I don't know what their leader thinks, but it's always surprising to me, like, how would they do that and why? It's very strange.
They come from the Bible, the religious people. But I have one more subject. Is a museum, I don't know if you have a section or you have something there. How anti-Semitism started?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. So first of all, throughout the wing that's devoted to Jewish history, there are columns throughout that wing that chronicle anti-Semitism as it evolved. And it has actually evolved. There is, in the section that's devoted to the Middle Ages, there is a replica of two statues. The real statues are in Strasbourg, France, and we have a replica of the statues. And the statues are ecclesia and synagoga. Ecclesia is the church, and synagoga is the synagogue. And these are Christian statues, and they depict an erect ecclesia and a bent over, blindfolded synagoga with a broken cane. Her eyes she's blind. And the message is, this is the religion of the future. This is the defeated religion of the past, okay? Now, this is the Middle Ages. But when you look at these statues, what is striking is that synagoga is just as pretty as ecclesia, okay? Now, in modern anti-Semitism, which began in the 19th century, you've got the nose, you've got the deformity, okay? That's already a different brand of anti-Semitism. In more ancient Christian anti-Semitism, it's simply a matter of history to them that one religion won out and another religion lost. But it's important to show the people the religion that was defeated. Okay. In more modern anti-Semitism, which is depicted in the museum, it becomes more of a racist anti-Semitism, physically racist, the Jewish scheming mind, all of that stuff. And then in more recent anti-Semitism, which we very lightly touch on in the museum, which is today's modern anti-Semitism, which is Muslim. It is also ultra-leftist Western anti-Semitism. It's very complex, and it's different from the previous iteration of anti-Semitism, but I have to say that we don't delve deeply into that sort of anti-Semitism. But certainly it's a theme that runs through the entire floor.
Yeah. So
The section is dedicated to the Dreyfus affair, for instance.
Right. Yeah. Tell me, I'm sure that you have in the museum different languages.
Yeah.
Also Arabic?
Yeah, so the museum, the entire museum in the labels is Hebrew and English, okay?
Yeah.
And then through audio guide, you've got several other languages, including Arabic, including, by the way, Mandarin Chinese.
Ah, okay.
Before COVID was very, very popular with Chinese tourists, which is a huge growing segment in Israeli.
Yes.
And the Chinese, I'm making a huge generalization here, but Chinese people are often fascinated by Jewish culture because they see similarities between our civilizations.
We are related somehow in the old times. They love Jerusalem, they love the Jews, they think we are connected. They really carry something that I have no idea where it started. It's very,
but you know, I told the story, I think also before. It's really kind of light. So when Ang Lee made this film, Eat, Drink, Women, stuff like this, was about Chinese family. And he did it with a collaboration with James Jamus, who is Jewish. And something didn't work there. So James Jamus said, you know what, let's rewrite it as a Jewish family. So they rewrote it as a Jewish family, and it was beautiful. And then they took it back to Chinese, and this is a film you see. Something something there.
So it's a civilization like ours, is thousands of years old. Right. It is a civilization that puts learning and education at a very high priority.
Love everything, yeah.
Right.
They see themselves as industrious and entrepreneurial, like the Jewish people are. So they see a affinity. Plus, there were Jews in China as far back as the 11th century.
Right.
Yeah.
Kaifeng on the Silk Road. There were Jews already then. And then, of course, in more recent history, Shanghai and Harbin and other places in China. And by the way, in China, there was never any anti-Semitism.
Yes, right. Listen, first of all, I think you opened up the door, of this. So it's not the Jewish Museum, it is
the Jewish Museum, and it's called Anu. It is the Jewish Museum.
It's not Bet Futsot anymore.
No.
Why?
It's not Bet Futsot, it's not the Diaspora Museum. It's Anu, Museum of the Jewish People.
Right.
Okay, so it's embraced actually.
It's rebranding.
It's rebranding, right?
But it's a big rebranding.
Yeah.
Then it's always, it's fascinating. And I really want to invite everybody to the museum. And I really would like to ask everybody when they come to the museum to give all their family information so the archives of the Jewish people can grow.
Yeah.
And when you go to look for something about somebody from your family, you can find it there.
Do I have time for one more minute for one story?
I wanted to ask you if there is some angle we didn't cover. Okay,
so there's several new things that we developed for the museum that no other museum does. One of them is an experimental app that takes your family tree and then crosses it with the family trees of prominent Jews that are displayed in the museum. So you can actually, if you give us your family tree, come to the museum, download an app. We'll tell you, okay, so you're Einstein's 14th cousin thrice removed.
Exactly.
Your special. Now, there's another feature to this, which is P2P. So if there's person to person. So you can, if you want to, ask that if somebody else in the museum, visiting the museum right now, is somehow related to you, we'll give you a poke. And then we're trying this thing out right now. It's in the pilot stage.
Wow.
In the first week of running the pilot, we called for volunteers to try this out, and a volunteer came in, and as we were doing it with her, she discovered that she was related to the person that was teaching her about the app.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Wow.
There you have it.
Who I want to be related to. Who I want to be related to, right?
You cannot.
Let me tell you something.
What?
Whoever you want to be related to, we're small people. You're related to everybody.
Everybody's related
I
to
know.
everybody.
Listen, Dan, I didn't know you, right? I know of you, but it was a pleasure to know you.
I had so much fun. And
Yeah.
so listen, once you're done interviewing or talking to all the interesting people in the world, come back to me because I think there's a lot more that we can talk
Much
about.
more.
We will come back. So
We
Tzili, thank you so much because you, of course, is not the only one that you brought to.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Thank
Tzipi.
you,
Thank you,
Tzili.
Dan,
Thank
and
you,
see you
everybody who
all
came.
next
Tzili,
Next week.
Baaretz, yalla boy.
I'm coming
We're
in a
coming,
week
we're
and
coming.
she's coming
We're
when,
coming.
yeah.
Yep.
she'll come.
מצוין. ביי, תודה רבה.